is. I mean, but these are the kind of books I like to read. That's the main reason I write the way I do, and have these types of characters, and where it's maybe a little more complex and it's not so easy figuring out if they're doing the right thing or not. Because I think that's the way life works too. But I was a huge fan, and still am, of John le Carré coming up. And so those are the kind of books I like to read, and so that's how I end up writing.
I think often Americans are lazy readers.
Sometimes. I guess especially if all you want the book for is to, you know, pass a 4-hour, 5-hour flight to the East Coast or something like that.
I'm not sure that a lot of American readers are as willing to invest in the book and to sort of dig into it. I mean, I noticed that there are, in Germany, for example, and certainly in Spain and Italy and all, when authors go there, they tend to draw much bigger crowds. There's a more, of course, they're smaller countries, they can focus more on a few locations. The media, though, seems to be much more intense and more interested. Here, it's very difficult to get a lot of press for authors.
And when you do, you tend to do these 2-minute radio interviews where they've probably read the first and the last page in the jacket, and so they ask you pretty superficial questions, and basically it goes boom, 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 and okay, thanks a lot, you're out of here, and now the traffic report. So it goes pretty fast, and so those types of moments also lend themselves to high-action novels, because they can talk about the high-action stuff in sort of that rapid pace. It fits right in, you know, with going straight to the traffic report from your
I wonder
book
how much
discussion.
of it's the Hollywood television influence.
I don't know.
And also, an awful lot of American writers subconsciously, if not overtly, write for Hollywood and television because there's so much money there.
True.
And also, I think, for example, it'd be very difficult to be a writer in Southern California without the movie. It's like the elephant in the room.
True.
And I can think of several writers who live in the Los Angeles area who, whether they wish or not, have to be thinking screenplay. And so there's a more visual, more high-action component. There's a tendency to move from scene to scene instead of a narrative that is more continuous, where people go to bed and get up the next day and they have lunch, and so you might have just a very small time frame for a big book.
Very short chapters.
Right, and then, but you can oftentimes in American novels skip over landscape and skip over time because you're essentially writing a series of scenes.
I think there is an American audience for these types of books. It's just, it's a little bit harder to find. And there's more, so the books that do come out that are like this, it's a lot more competitive to get those readers. Like Martin Cruz Smith writes that way, Le Carré writes that way, Alan Furst writes that way, and he's got quite a following. So once you start to build a following, they're pretty loyal because they're looking for that type of book. It's just, you've got to get in touch with them first.
I think it is a loyal following. I just didn't think it's a big number following. And there are some publishers like Knopf, which has always been a, quote, literary house, that I think supports those kinds of, you know, they're not looking
John
for...
Burdett writes for Knopf.
They're not looking for, you know, 100, 200,000, 500,000.
They wouldn't shoo it away.
No, but I don't think that that's...
But that's not mandatory for them.
Right, and so they do tend to hold on to authors who... You know, now, have you ever written any short stories? Does your mind work that way at all?
It doesn't tend to. I wrote one for a Baltimore noir collection.
Right. I remembered seeing you in it.
And I've written another one for a collection that Otto Penzler is putting together, hopes to put together on espionage short stories.
Nice.
And so I'm hoping that will come out. But he has said, and he's right, it's tough to write an espionage short story.
Very. I don't think you can get enough background into it. That sort of classic hook is probably just too small a stage to really do much of a job.
So it'll be a challenge to see if he gets enough stories and if they're all too long or what the case will be.
I wonder if he could do a collection of novellas. What an interesting idea.
I don't know.
Back it down to 3 or 4 or 5 or something instead of... I think that Akashic series of urban noir for different cities, though, is a very... we're doing one for Phoenix. One of my staff members, Patrick Milliken, in fact, is the editor of Phoenix Noir, which I find wonderful. And, of course, Baltimore Noir, I assume you and Laura would certainly have to be in it. Did Stephen write a story for that?
Was that?
Did Stephen write a story for that?
I don't think Stephen did, but Laura did edit that collection. And she has a story in it, and her husband, David Simon, who writes for and produces The Wire, has a story in there, and I had a story in there, and Sujata Massey. And
how about George Pelicanos?
No, George has one in the
DC?
Washington, the DC noir, yeah.
Well, I do love the idea. It's
Yeah,
so
it's been
hard,
very
in fact, to
successful.
do short story collections that sell well today. For some
Sure.
reason, although we've talked about, American novels being almost cinematic with short chapters and all the other stuff, short stories have actually dramatically diminished in terms of their sales. I think a lot of it's because the magazine market has gotten so small.
That does have a lot to do with it. It's harder to get paid for them, and it's a hard form. There's not much. It's like sailing a little, speaking of small boats, like sailing a little sunfish as opposed to a nice big luxury yacht where you can kind of be lax and there's plenty of margin for error. You make one little mistake with a little boat like that and you're over in the water. Same thing with a short story. If you err, it's glaring.
Very true. I think the great value it has for some authors is that you might have a small idea that
true.
you just can't make a book out of it,
Right.
but you can, in fact, use it to drive something short.
And also, if you have an idea that maybe is a little bit lighter and not, it won't support, a novel treatment, it'll be nice and fun to work with it actually in a short story.
So, from here, with your 5 books, we're going next to Berlin, and then you're working on something set in Dubai.
Dubai, that's right.
So you've really got the whole globe. Are you going to stick to places that you've been?
I am. I would never set a novel somewhere I haven't been and haven't gone to do research and haven't gotten the real feel for the place. It just, to me, it would be apparent right away that it was inauthentic.
Well, I'm so pleased for you that this has worked out. We were a big supporter, as you know, of your first book.
Yes.
Sent you truckloads of them to autograph. So I'm always gratified when, somebody whose work I love turns into a successful author, because it doesn't always work that way.
No, it doesn't, but thanks. And Poison Pen has been a huge help to me with these books.
Well, I'm delighted to hear it. Thank you for coming and sharing some time with us today.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Criminal Calendar.